Welcome, cousins and siblings. I'm Pope Pedro I, the first hope of the Church of the Holy Book. Welcome, cousins and siblings. Today we turn to a chapter that the prophet spoke with much care. The Book of Jane. Jane Goodall was an inspiration, a person of great knowledge and fearless determination. When the prophet began teaching this chapter, we hoped the work might be finished in time to place a copy in Jane Goodall's hands, not as praise and not as flattery, but as gratitude. A simple offering, a way of saying thank you for what she showed the world. But history moves on its own clock, and sometimes the people who give us the clearest mirrors do not remain long enough to see their reflections in our pages. Still, gratitude does not expire. And so today, we open the Book of Jane. We begin by opening to the Book of Jane, chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. At 4 years old, she took it upon herself to understand where eggs came from. She hid in a henhouse for hours, silent and still, waiting to witness the miracle. Her mother searched for her in panic, but when the little girl finally emerged, her eyes were alight, not with fear, but with discovery. Let's reflect on that. The beginning of Jane's story is not a laboratory. It's not a university or a lecture hall. It is a child sitting quietly in a henhouse, watching, waiting, trying to understand something small. And this moment tells us something important about knowledge. Discovery rarely begins with authority. It begins with curiosity, the willingness to ask a question and remain patient long enough to see the answer appear. Jane Goodall did not begin her life as a famous scientist. She began as a careful observer. And in time, that quiet attention would change the way humanity understands itself. Staying in chapter 1, let's turn to verses 52 to 54. That would become her first lesson to the world, that to understand the lives of others, we must first slow our own. That science is not a conquest, but attention. Now, what does that tell me? It tells me, in a world that rushes towards conclusions, Jane moved slowly. Where others tried to force answers, she chose to watch. And because of that patience, the forest began to reveal something remarkable. It was neither immediate or dramatic, but quietly, one small moment at a time. We now turn to chapter 2, verses 61 to 66. It was David who showed her what would change the world. He picked up a twig, stripped the leaves, and used it to fish for termites. She froze. Tool use, a line once thought absolute between humans and animals, was erased. And that just goes to show, with a single twig in the hands of a chimpanzee, a whole wall collapsed. For generations, humanity believed tool use separated us from the rest of the living world. That belief helped build the illusion that we stood above nature. Jane did not destroy that illusion with argument. She simply wrote down what she saw. And truth has a way of dissolving boundaries. The chimpanzees were not just reflections of us, they were relatives. And that realization carried a deeper implication. If we share intelligence, if we share emotion, if we share even the ability to suffer, then we also share in the responsibility. Moving now to chapter 3, verses 29 to 35. She knew that true science is not a wall between observer and observed, but a bridge. And from that bridge, she would continue to see the world as it is, full of mirrors. For when she looked at the chimpanzees, she did not see something less than human. She saw a reflection, a lineage shared, a kinship undeniable. To see that kinship is to take responsibility. See, and Jane here did not discover something smaller than us. She discovered something larger, a family, one branch of life observing another. And like any family, what she saw was not always gentle. The forest revealed kindness, but it also revealed conflict, compassion, violence, the same mixture that exists in human societies. And this forced an uncomfortable truth. The line between human and animal was never as wide as we imagined. The whole book of Jane is one of my favorites in the Holy Book. But we are going to skip ahead to chapter 5, verses 50 to 54. They were like us because we are like them. And from this came a deeper lesson, that compassion cannot be built upon the fantasy of purity, that love, to endure, must survive disillusionment. To honor another being is not to idealize it, but to accept its full nature and care anyway. So, to see clearly is not always comforting. Jane refused to turn away from what she observed, not when it was beautiful and not when it was disturbing. Because truth is not meant to flatter us, it is meant to guide us. And as the years passed, Jane's role began to change. She arrived in Gombe as an observer, but eventually she understood that observation alone was not enough. Seeing the truth creates responsibility. I want to share 2 more passages with you. The next one is chapter 7, verses 1 through 11. Her feet once walked the steep hills of Gombe. Her hands once held the leaves damp with morning. But as her years grew long, her path moved far from the forest that first called her name. She now walked the cities of the world: New York, Beijing, Cape Town, Buenos Aires. She stood before presidents and school children, before scientists and cynics, and told them the same truth, that hope is not passive, it is a verb. That's really strong. Hope is not passive. It is not the belief that things will improve on their own. Hope is a decision, a commitment to act. Jane Goodall spent decades traveling the world with that message, speaking to scientists and to governments and to children, reminding us that the future of the living world is not predetermined. It is shaped by what we choose to do next. And this brings us to the closing of the book of Jane, chapter 8, verses 38 through 52. Jane Goodall gave us more than knowledge. She gave us a mirror. She showed us who we are and who we could be. Not conquerors, not stewards, but kin. And kin do not turn away. Let this chapter not be a conclusion, but an opening. Let your days be a continuation of her work. Let your footsteps walk where she once stood. Let your voice be added to the call. For the story of Jane does not end in Gombe, or in books, or in words carved on stone. It ends in what you do next. Thus ends the book of Jane, and so begins the work. It's moving. The book of Jane ends with a mirror, not pointed at the past, but pointed at us. Jane Goodall spent her life observing the living world. And in doing so, she left us with questions like, what will we protect? What will we plant? And what will we save? The book of Jane has ended, but the work it asks of us has only begun. Thank you so much for listening. If you would continue, the book remains open. There are more chapters and prophets to learn from. Let us read them together. There's more questions waiting to be faced. Let us face them together. Not quickly, not passively, but with the same attention Jane gave the forest. And let's see what reveals itself. Remember, there are no absolutes, only better understanding. Be a net positive, cousins and siblings.